The season of lies is almost over, but before Thursday's draft, Jeff Bell and I are going to go through all of the burning rumors around the league and see what's smoke and mirrors and what actually might be simmering. So, Jeff, we made it pretty simple today to go through this show sheet. Found an article on ESPN that Peter Schrager and Adam Schefter wrote, kind of going through all of the biggest rumors leading up to Thursday's draft. So let's go ahead and kick it off. The first one that we saw on that list was about Kirk Cousins, something that we talked about not too long ago being a potential trade candidate. Publicly, the Falcons have said that they don't want to trade Kirk Cousins away, that they're happy with him as a backup. But according to these reports, privately, they are having conversations and asking teams to take on the remainder of his deal, which is $37.5 million guaranteed. Jeff, kind of a simple question. Do you think Kirk Cousins is worth what they'd be asking, which is likely a day two pick and $37.5 million? Do you think there's a team out there that might actually want to make that move?
I don't think it would be a day two pick, to be honest, especially if you're picking up that full contract. I think if you pick up that full contract, you're basically letting the Falcons out of their purgatory, their jail that they're potentially in. You're saving them a ton of money. I would expect that it would be something in day three. I think it's legitimate. And I think that when you really look at it, you're talking about the Steelers, I think is the main team here because they're being played around by Aaron Rodgers and they're not really the type of organization that would go for those types of things. And so I think that if Aaron Rodgers is going to mess around with you before he even signs the contract, then you already know what you're getting coming into that building. And so the Steelers, they've traditionally, you saw them last year make the playoffs with Russell Wilson, Justin Fields playing together. You saw them on the verge of the playoffs with Mason Rudolph, with Kenny Pickett, those types of options. So Kirk Cousins brings you some stability, ideally, and you're hoping that he's another year recovered from that injury that really sapped a lot of his arm strength last year, that Achilles injury, and bouncing back from that, putting him into there. The Steelers don't have very many picks. They've traded that second round pick for DK Metcalf. So if you're able to go out and trade a fifth or a sixth or do one of these deals where it's, we'll give you a fifth, we get back a seventh and Kirk Cousins and we'll take his whole contract. I think that's a win-win probably for both sides, and it gets you out of messing around in the Aaron Rodgers, whatever. It's not a sweepstakes at this point.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with Aaron Rodgers, but I do know that Kevin Stefanski was the offensive coordinator in Minnesota for a handful of years when Kirk Cousins was there. The Cleveland Browns right now are desperate for a quarterback, and that ties in with another rumor that we saw from this article where it sounds like the Cleveland Browns don't have any interest in drafting a quarterback in round one. They're sitting there at pick number 2 right now. All of the smoke is looking like it's going to be either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter at that number 2 spot. So you talk about the connection with Kirk Cousins and Kevin Stefanski. They desperately need a quarterback right now. I don't think that I don't know. I mean, they've got Joe Flacco, who has been okay. They can get a few years younger with Kirk Cousins, who's no young spring chicken by any means. But do you think that that could be a potential opportunity here for the Browns to go out, spend that top 2 pick on Travis Hunter, and then use one of those day 3 picks to address the quarterback situation with Kirk Cousins, a guy who is already familiar with Stefanski's system?
Not at what the Falcons are asking for. If the Falcons want somebody to take that contract, they can't make it work with Deshaun Watson. There's just no way that they can make that work. I know we've
Still owe
seen,
120 million to Deshaun Watson plus the
yeah,
40 million to Kirk Cousins. That's a lot of money tied up. And
it would be
yeah,
very difficult to field a roster for the 2025 season. And I do think that they would like to field a roster. So I think that maybe that's where you're talking about the Steelers. Maybe the Steelers are seeing the Browns in play on this and thinking, well, if we can do this fifth for the seventh, we'll eat the contract. Don't worry about it. And also Kirk Cousins is not going to be a Brown. Whereas I think the Browns path would be the Falcons dangle him throughout the draft. Nobody's willing to bite on eating that money. And the Falcons, I do think that there's a level of the Falcons respecting Cousins, being thankful that he came there last year and wanting to do right by him, and probably reaching some sort of settlement of Cousins gives up half his money or something to that regard, and they cut him and he walks free. And then that's where I could see Cleveland coming into play on this. I mean, they did make the move for Joe Flacco, and I think that says probably something about where their mind stands. And I've seen comparisons talking about when the Seahawks signed Matt Flynn and then drafted Russell Wilson, and they let the rookie Wilson win it. I think that the Browns might be in that type of position where they could have Pickett, they could have Joe Flacco, and then they could look and say, well, we'll take Jackson Dart in round 2, and may the best man win. We'll just go with whatever works out here in week 1. I think that's the most likely path for the Browns. I think that if Cousins is traded, it won't be to Cleveland just because of the contractual obligations problems there.
And the other thing I'll say is, right now, of course, the asking price for the Falcons is very high, where they're asking for a high draft pick and they're asking for the team to take on the $37.5 million. We got to remember, though, Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, has never really shied away from just taking his medicine when he needs to. It was just a few years ago that they realized Matt Ryan wasn't the answer, and they traded him to Indianapolis, and they ate all of the money on that contract at the time. It was almost $50 million, the most dead cap a team had ever taken on in NFL history. And we've seen other teams since then, the Broncos with Russell Wilson and the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, follow a similar blueprint. The Falcons probably aren't, crazy about the idea of eating $40 million, but it's something that they have done in recent history. So don't be surprised if that asking price for Kirk Cousins drops every minute that we get into the draft.
Yeah, and part of that too. I mean, they Arthur Blank and the city of Atlanta absolutely loved Michael Vick, and when
Yep.
that stuff went down, they ate that money too, and they moved on from there. So that's another case where they're willing to do that.
Let's talk about Shedeur Sanders a little bit, Jeff. This is a guy who a year ago, when we were looking at 2025 draft odds, was the odds-on favorite. It was actually negative money if you were betting Shedeur Sanders to go number one overall. Now there are rumors swirling that he might end up falling out of round one. What we're hearing is the Giants sitting there at 3, which for a long time seemed like the team that was going to take Sanders. Seems like the organization is split. You've got some guys in the front office that really like him, some guys that aren't as sold on him. You've got the Saints, who a lot of people said, with this Derek Carr injury, maybe they're interested. They have publicly come out and said that they aren't interested. In this article by Schefter and Schrager, they said that they would think that the Saints are more likely to trade up in day 2 to take Jackson Dart than they would be to take Shedeur Sanders at 9. So now all of a sudden we have this scenario at 21 where the Pittsburgh Steelers are there. And earlier they said that they didn't have any interest in drafting Shedeur Sanders, but now it sounds like they just didn't expect Shedeur Sanders to be there at 21. So that could be the potential floor for him. But if the Steelers don't take him at 21, we could be looking at Shedeur Sanders free falling all the way into day 2. And something that they talked about in this article that I was reading that I found kind of interesting is that a lot of teams are concerned about Shedeur Sanders and what his future will look like playing without his dad for the first time since middle school. And there's a lot of concern that if Shedeur Sanders gets drafted somewhere and it doesn't immediately pan out, there's going to be the fan base like crying to get Deion Sanders in there to replace the head coach. So there's a lot more to this situation than just drafting a quarterback and plugging him into a system. What do you make of this, Jeff? Do you think that Shedeur Sanders falls to round 2, or do you think that the Steelers could catch him at 21?
My initial inclination is the Steelers grab him at 21, but the way that we've seen, if you remember back, 2 years ago to the Will Levis draft, I mean, there were rumors the day of the draft that Will Levis was going to go number 2 to the Texans, and we saw him fall out of
Not
the
just
first round.
rumors, he was the odds-on favorite. Like, it was like minus 115 to bet him to go number 2 that year.
Yeah, and this is something that we've seen. Last year bucked it a little bit, but I think the quality of quarterback needs to be considered on last year, because I know there's been a lot of talk that Cam Ward would have been quarterback 7 in last year's class, and you probably have 6 quarterbacks that would go first in this draft. So that, I think, is a consideration. But we've seen in the past, Malik Willis had a lot of steam and went into, I think he was a 3rd round pick, and you saw Will Levis, we mentioned him dropping, and it seems to be that these teams are now willing, especially when you're looking at talking about the Browns and the Giants, in order to take this pick of Shedeur Sanders, you would have to pick to pass up. I believe there are 2 top blue chip players in this draft, and I think it's Travis Hunter and I think it's Abdul Carter. And so those 2 teams are sitting there with those picks, and the most valuable picks in the draft, arguably, and being able to take those players. But you've seen it. And if you have evaluated this class, that Shedeur Sanders is not all that different from Jackson Dart and not all that different from Jaylen Milroe. When you add everything together, why would you wouldn't take him at 3 for sure. And you would probably wait and see. And if you, for some of these guys to come off the board and start to chain together. And so if you're sitting there, you know that these teams at the end of the first round aren't taking quarterback. And once you get past the Steelers, hypothetically, nobody's taking quarterback. And so we saw last year teams trade up, Buffalo moving back into the beginning of the second round. There certainly opens up that potential for one of these teams to jump up and grab that 5th-year option and grab that quarterback there at the end of the first. These other teams, Buffalo, Kansas City, those types of teams that would be willing to move back into the second, that I think is probably the most likely outcome at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, we just saw the benefit of being able to draft a quarterback late in round one. We saw the Baltimore Ravens do it, and they might have, pulled Lamar Jackson around a little bit in these contract negotiations more than he had wanted. But when you get the 4 years on the rookie deal, then the fifth year option, and then if quarterback's good enough, you can franchise tag them for 2 years out of there. You're looking at 7 years of contract control on a team friendly deal before you have to make any sort of long term commitment. So I'm kind of with you there that if Shedeur Sanders or Jaylen Milroe are sitting there late in round one, you might see some of these teams that are sitting there at the top of round two might want to trade up a few picks just to lock in that little bit of extra contract control. And we also just got another rumor that just came out about 11 minutes ago as we're sitting here recording on Tuesday morning, Jeff. Again, from Peter Schrager, shared by Adam Schefter on Twitter, that the Browns and the Giants sitting at 2 and 3 are both fielding calls right now about trading back in the drafts, that there are a lot of teams that want to trade up, not just for Travis Hunter and for Abdul Carter, but there are a lot of teams that want to trade into the top three to take Ashton Jinty. So as it stands right now when we're recording, I will put it out there right now. It's 10:27 a.m. on Tuesday morning. This episode is going to come out in a few hours. Who knows what's going to change between now and then? I mean, we might actually see teams move up into the top three. Now, this next section in the article that I want to mention, we can kind of gloss over pretty quickly. We did an entire show about this a few weeks ago. Potential veterans who could get traded, and we talked about Will Levis, we talked about Sam Howell, we talked about George Pickens, we talked about Kirk Cousins and Dallas Goedert. But there were a few other names in this list that we didn't mention that I want to highlight. Treylon Burks and Jalen Hyatt, you know, guys that were fun in college that haven't really panned out. If they get traded, maybe resuscitates their dynasty value just enough that you want to maybe, I don't know, throw out a fourth round pick and see if you can bring one of them in and see what happens. But the big name that shocked me, Jeff, Travis Etienne Jr. That was a name that I had not expected to see on the trade block, but talked with Alfredo Brown about this yesterday on our show. And we got to remember, sure, technically a first round pick, but that was viewed by a lot of people as a reach at the time. Now that they've seen Tank Bigsby kind of emerge as this very good running back, they might be a little bit more tepid on keeping Travis Etienne around. And then, of course, we've got the rumors at 5 that they might be interested in taking Ashton Jinty. So talk to me a little bit about Travis Etienne and what a trade could potentially do for his value.
Yeah, Travis Etienne, he was drafted, 3 coaching regimes ago at this point. It was Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson to now Liam Cohen coming in there, a different general manager. He's on that 5th-year option. You look at what the Jaguars have already done. They released Evan Ingram and they traded Christian Kirk. So they've already kind of moved on from the players that the previous regime, Trent Baalke, and then Urban Meyer before Doug Peterson moved in, built around Trevor Lawrence. And I absolutely think they're going to take Ashton Jinty at number 5. I think that when you look at James Gladstone, the general manager of the Jaguars, coming out of that Rams tree, I think he is very, very confident about his ability in the draft. And I think he wants to hit a home run. I think that the common pick there, Mason Graham, while he can be a solid NFL player for the next decade, he's not really screaming home run. And it's really the knock on him is not having that upside. Ashton Jinty, everything about him is home run. And so you're not really getting savings off of Jinty. I think he would be like the 5th highest paid running back in the league immediately off
Yeah.
that rookie contract coming in at the 5 pick, but you do
But
have
4 years from
control.
now,
Yeah, you have 5 years of control there, and so if you're looking at this as the confidence that they have, the ability working within that Rams, and we saw how the Rams with later round draft picks really flipped that roster and overhauled that team. Everybody thought that they would be a tanking team, rebuilding team 2 years ago, and they've been back-to-back playoffs now, and they pushed the Eagles as far as anybody pushed the Eagles in these playoffs. So Gladstone's coming out of that, confident about that. They think that they've got their quarterback with Trevor Lawrence. They don't think that they're going to be picking high again, and so you grab Jinty and you make him your centerpiece, and in turn, Travis Etienne hits the trade block. You get anything for him, and so that's where it just makes a whole lot of sense on Etienne moving. And even beyond that, if you look at this depth of this running back class and Etienne's in his 5th-year option, you can get something for him. We're happy grabbing a running back later and playing Tank Bigsby, going that direction if we don't take Jinty. I just think there's a lot more options on trading Travis Etienne than him being a centerpiece or part of this Jacksonville franchise moving forward.
and we talk about Mason Graham kind of being the pick of conventional wisdom. That's the one that would make the most sense, and that's what I've been mocking in my last couple of mocks. Might change on the one that comes out tomorrow. We'll see, but you don't want to look too much at team needs when you're sitting there at the top of the draft. You do want to take the best player available, but right now, I mean, if there's one unit that Jacksonville has to feel okay about, it's their defensive line. I mean, they've got Josh Hines Allen, they've got Eric Armstead, they've got Trayvon Walker. So Mason Graham might be the best player available when they're sitting there at 5, but I don't know if that's necessarily something that they need to address right now. They need a wide receiver too. They need offensive line help. They need a running back. They don't need any extra defensive pressure. So no doubt plugging Mason Graham in there over Devon Hamilton would make them one of the best defensive lines in the league, but very much so a luxury pick right now, and I don't know if they can really afford a luxury pick. Before we talk about some other players that might get traded, though, let's talk about that because that was one of these nuggets in this article as well. It said Jackson is a wild card. Watch. That is a direct quote from Peter Schrager. Ted McMillan could be in play. They talk about Liam Cohen being over there. He saw how valuable a guy like Mike Evans could be, this big prototypical X receiver, and that they might be interested in taking Ted McMillan at 5. We talked about Ashton Jinty potentially being there at 5 as well. So I think the top 4 picks, I don't want to say are figured out, but we kind of think we know who's going to go in the top 4 in some order or another. I think the draft this year kind of starts at 5. There's a lot of different directions that Jacksonville could go here.
Yeah, and usually when it comes down to it, I tend to believe. I guess the way I view the draft is believe what you hear early and believe what you hear late, and in the middle is just a whole bunch of noise. And if back in January, back in February, people were talking about McMillan to the Jaguars, and there was talk there on the comparison to Mike Evans is natural. Liam Cohen coaching them last year. I think the emphasis that Cohen's offense put around wide receivers between Evans and Chris Godwin last year when he was with the Rams, the emphasis on Cooper Kupp and in that offense. And they love Brian Thomas, certainly, but can you name their wide receiver 2 right now? Because it's basically Diami Brown, Gabe Davis, Parker Washington, and a million tears would be thrown out in Dynasty if McMillan and Brian Thomas are paired together because there can only be one. But I think
I have the complete opposite mindset. I think
I'm saying
on
this is
offense. It's amazing.
Dave.
Yeah, then you get a high-low offense. I mean, 2 versal guys that can do a lot of different things. That would be a dream for Trevor Lawrence.
Because you understand how it works, but when you only want one because there can only be one. Yeah, no, I think that I was talking to you pre-show about what the Bears do, and that the more we sit here and talk about it, the more it solidifies in my mind of the Bears. It feels pretty natural for the Bears to trade up to 5 to get Ashton Genty, and for the Jaguars to grab Ted McMillan at number 10. Feels like what I will be having in my final mock draft.
I really hate the idea of the Bears trading up, but let's talk about that because there was another nugget from this article that we're going to get to. The Bears are, quote unquote, praying that Ashton Jinty falls to 10. But, Jeff, as we've talked about a little bit on the show already, it doesn't sound like there's any chance Ashton Jinty is going to fall to 10. We've got, I think, 5 at Jacksonville would make a lot of sense, but then 6 at Las Vegas. I see almost no world where he falls past 6 if the Raiders are still sitting there with that pick. So the Bears are praying that he falls there. Prayers may not be answered, and he might not be available at 10. So what do you think the Bears might do if they're sitting there at 10? I've heard a lot of different directions they could go. I've heard Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland both being guys that they might be interested. I've heard Armand Membu might be somebody that they're interested. I've heard Kelvin Banks might be somebody that they're interested in. I think that they really want a running back. And while they've got those 2 picks in the second round, 39 and 41, there's no guarantee that one of these big 3 is going to be there. When I talk about the big 3, it's Ashton Jinty, Travion Henderson, and Omarion Hampton. So I think in a perfect world, they could trade back, maybe flip picks with Pittsburgh, move back to 21 and take Travion Henderson there. But I also don't think it's that out of question for them to, or that it would be that crazy for them to just take Travion Henderson there at 10. We got to remember when they took Jahmyr Gibbs, sure, the pick aged beautifully now with the benefit of hindsight, but when they took Jahmyr Gibbs at the time, that surprised a lot of people. People were expecting Gibbs to kind of be an early round 2 pick, and then they took him inside the top 10, and he immediately became a superstar. I almost wonder if they do the same with Travion Henderson here.
Sitting at 10, you're looking at I think the tier is gone before you go
Right.
because
Yeah.
players that we know, obviously Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, I think that they're in tier by themselves. You've got Cam Ward, you've got Will Campbell, you've got Ashton Dempsey, you've got Armin Membu that you mentioned. I think even Tyler Warren is arguably in that tier, and I think Mason Graham is in that tier, and
Mhm.
that gets you to pick 8. And so sitting at 10, you're
Kind of in
right.
no man's land at that point.
Yes, exactly. You're right outside of where you really want to be, and so that's where, yeah, like you said, you either move up or you move out, and they flush with picks still from that Carolina trade. I think that it makes a lot of sense for them that to move up and to go get that, and given Jacksonville's confidence in the draft to go get more swings at the picks potentially, and so that makes sense as the most likely thing that the Bears will do. If they stick at this pick, I mean, man, Colston Loveland, I could really see that, given the value of tight end.
Sam
I know
Laporta-esque.
Sam Laporta esque player, and
I'll
we
just
know
fill you in
Cole
real
Kmet's
quickly, Jeff.
definitely.
Yeah, for whatever reason, the Bears fan base, like Cole Kmet was a fan favorite since the moment they drafted him. And then about a month ago, rumors started coming out about Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. And now Bears fans have completely forgotten about Cole Kmet. They're like, get this guy out of here and give us one of these new shiny toys. Like, I have never seen a fan base turn on a player as quickly as Bears fans have turned on Cole Kmet.
But they've given him a lot of money, and so that they gave
Yeah, I
him an
mean, he's
extension. But
yeah, they did give him an extension, but at the time, I remember that extension drawing a lot of criticism. But when you look at the guaranteed money and you saw that extension didn't kick in for a couple of years, I mean, he's outside of the top 10 tight ends. And by the time he hits the end of that extension, he'll probably be paid around, top 20 tight end, which is, I think, about what he is.
And the other important thing to remember is you can have 2 tight ends on the field at the same time. There's no rules preventing that. So they can go ahead and grab Colston Loveland and still have Cole Kmet on the field at the same time. When you look at their current depth chart or projected starters, they've got Olamide Zaccheaus projected as a starter for
Right.
the Bears, and that's a steep fall off from, if you're thinking in your mind of having
Keenan
DJ
Allen.
Moore and having Rome Odunze and having Keenan Allen last year. It's a big drop off even at this age of Keenan Allen to Olamide Zaccheaus, and so that's where maybe you take Loveland, maybe you switch to a base 2 tight end set. You're playing a little bit heavier, Chicago, cold weather, those types of things, and utilizing those 2 outside receivers heavily. That might be in play as well. But again, you're just kind of stuck in no man's land because they could go with the defensive line too. But I think that you probably arguably looking at a similar caliber player by the next time you hit the clock on defensive line. And my latest mock, I've got Calvin Banks going at 9 to the Saints. And so
Mhm.
all 3 tackles are off the board at that point. You'd be looking at Josh Simmons potentially if that's the direction you wanted to go. So I think they go up or out is basically where I land with the Bears.
And the last thing I'll say, you do talk about Olamide Zaccheaus. I always struggle with that one. You talk about him kind of being the wide receiver 3 right now. And I do think that there's something to be said for them wanting to play out of 12 personnel a little bit more frequently because Cole Kmet can do the inline stuff, but he's also a very good receiver. And if you pair him up with a guy who is a little bit more of a receiver than a traditional tight end, like Colston Loveland, for instance, then you're kind of looking at a recreation of what Belichick ran with the Patriots 10, 12 years ago, where they had Gronk and Aaron Hernandez. We've also heard that Ben Johnson is making a strong push right now that he wants to teach Caleb Williams to play under center. Caleb Williams, who has only played out of a shotgun personnel, basically or shotgun formation, basically his entire career, they want him playing out of center or under center. So what that tells me is this team does want to play a little bit heavier and they do want to establish the run. We've seen them make big investments in the offensive line. And if your base personnel is, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and then whatever running back they take in round 2, that's a pretty nice personnel to be rolling out on a consistent basis. You've got a lot of different mismatches there you can take advantage of all over the field. So would make a lot of sense for them to go Loveland if he's still available. And I think if Warren is there, I think they're going to turn that card in very, very quickly. But that brings us to the next guy I want to talk about, Tyler Warren. Sounds like he is the favorite for the Jets at 7. I had that in my mock 1.0, had it in mock 2.0, and I'm probably going to have it in mock 3.0 as well. Jeff, I know you've talked a little bit about the Justin Fields, Jeremy Ruckert connection from Ohio State and that they might want to nurture that a little bit. But I think that if you're sitting there at 7, you do talk about that kind of top tier of 7 or 8 players. Does Tyler Warren fit in that tier for you?
I think he does. When you really break it down and you look at what he can bring to the field, I think he definitely does. His physicality stands out. It stands out among everything, and his after the catch, and that's what you're looking for. He's just a monster with the ball in his hands down the field. Especially if you're going with Justin Fields at quarterback, you saw his connection with Cole Kmet. I mean, this would be that times a million, and so that's he's comfortable playing with the tight end there. You probably want to play a little bit heavier with Justin Fields at quarterback and leading on that run game a little bit more, and Tyler Warren plays into that as well. I think they'd love to get Armand Membo. I think that the Raiders are going to take him at 6, though, would be my expectation. So he'll be off the board, and then they take Tyler Warren, and maybe they look later in the draft on because tackle is a huge need for them. Last year they patched it over with Tyron Smith and with Morgan Moses. Both of those players are gone. They used Olu Fashu, that the 11th pick last year on him. He's up and down rookie year, didn't really solidify that position. So you're looking at needing tackle, but them being off the board, Warren being the next best thing because, a big tight end that can also block people can help if you don't have good tackles.
Right. And I think that Membu would make a lot of sense for them as well. I mean, this is the Jets. We saw them just draft Mekhi Becton a handful of years ago, just a physical freak that needed a little bit of development. They might go a similar route this year with Membu. Let's talk about some of the quarterbacks, Jeff, and 2 that I want to talk about specifically. We're bouncing all over on this show. I'm sorry, there's like no flow or rhyme or reason. We're just trying to decipher rumors 2 days before the draft here. It's a little wild, but Tyler Shuck. We got a report in this article saying that some teams have him ranked as this class's QB1. Age is obviously a concern, going into his age 26 season, really only has 1 full season as a starter under his belt as well. I don't know what to make of this Tyler Shuck stuff, Jeff. I am not overly impressed when I watch him. I think that he's got the physical tools. He's tall. He's athletic. He can process occasionally, but makes a lot of errant throws, head scratching decisions every now and then. And then you look at the age, 26 years old. You don't think there's a lot of room for growth and development at that point. He kind of is what he is. What do we make of this Tyler Shuck noise, smoke? I don't really know what to make of it, Jeff.
Where do you think Lamar Jackson actually should have been drafted?
I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, or like, are you saying what
He
team
was a
or what
Heisman
pick?
Trophy winner that was unbelievable on the
That fell to
field.
32. Yeah, I mean, he should have been a top 5 pick, but I think that teams hadn't really fully adopted. There's still, you got to remember, I mean, that wasn't too long after RG3 had his career ended with an injury, and I think that there was kind of um, a narrative going around the NFL that the only rushing quarterbacks you could have are of the Cam Newton stature, the 6'6", 250-pound guys. And that if you got an undersized rushing quarterback, he was just going to break down. I think that's kind of why Lamar Jackson fell to where he did.
Yeah. And there's Tyler Shuck checks all the boxes for a very traditional approach to the quarterback position in the NFL. And that is what's going on here. I think that's what's risen him up. You look at his physical tools are definitely there. He looks the part. It's the type of thing of when you think about a quarterback, you think about an NFL quarterback, you want a big guy coming into the room, commanding presence, and being that maturity at 26. The same article said that was a positive for some teams
Right.
of getting a mature player that had seen a lot and coming in. And so
Brandon
I think
Weeden, his
that's
experience was also positive.
yes, it was, and he went the first round. But I think it's just that traditional mindset, probably when it really comes down to it, and it's probably maybe a little bit more on the ownership group, or some traditional old school football mind type of general managers. Probably absolutely love Tyler Shuck, and it's like it's always reminded me of like the Blake Bortles and like the Blaine Gabbert
Yeah.
and like these
Yeah.
guys that you watch them and you're like, I don't think he's any good, but he's going to go third in the draft because the teams that are picking third in the draft pick third in the draft quite often. So
Yep.
I think it's a lot of those types of things, probably when it really comes down to it.
Jaylen Milroe, another quarterback worth discussing. I was kind of surprised by this. He's a guy that I have thought deserves to go in the first round because of the tools and because of the, not just the tools, but the athleticism, the brains, the leadership. I mean, there's so many things that I really like about Jaylen Milroe, but Peter Schrager was very, very quick to just say that he only got an invite because he's one of the class's top quarterbacks, and that he expects him to fall to round 2. And he said, you see this all the time where these quarterbacks get invited to the draft and then they still hang around on Friday and they get drafted on Friday. And I mean, it didn't sound in this report like Peter Schrager was even entertaining the idea that Jaylen Milroe could potentially go round 1. So is this throwing some cold water on some of the dreams that we've had, Jeff, about Jaylen Milroe going round 1, getting a good landing spot late in the first, going to Pittsburgh, some of these things that we've tossed around?
Well, again, we started the show talking about Shedeur Sanders. And if we're struggling to place Shedeur Sanders in the first round, I mean, Shedeur Sanders has been viewed above Jaylen Milroe throughout the entire process. You're playing that game of cat and mouse where if you've evaluated Shedeur Sanders, Jaylen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck to be roughly the same, we've seen the last couple of years teams have kind of leaned towards the I'm going to use my first round pick on a position player, so I feel like I have a hit in this draft, and then I will take the quarterback later. Whereas that mentality used to be, I'm going to use my pick on Blaine Gabbert, and he's my quarterback of the future. And if he hits, nothing else matters. Meanwhile, if he doesn't, well, I'm completely screwed. But I think that it's just been, and if you're grouping these players together, as long as you see all 4 on the board, you still have all 4 on the board. And we see it when we're doing our fantasy drafts. When I've got 3 running backs here that I'd love to pick, and all 3 are on the board. I'm going to let them all go, and maybe I'll grab one. Maybe I'll still get one of them next time around. Versus, well, I wanted 3 running backs, 2 are gone. I'm definitely taking number 3 now, and there's no question there. And so if you're hitting on the clock and you've got 3 or 4 quarterbacks all evaluated together, and you're 20 picks away on your next pick, and you don't expect any of those players to go before your next pick, then you're probably going to let some of those guys sit and just take the one that falls to you.
All right, Jeff, let's wrap up with wide receivers here. We got 2 things that I want to talk about regarding this wide receiver class. The first one is Emeka Egbuka, who you and I both know this, but apparently it's noteworthy from Peter Schrager here, is that he is a special player and that he expects him to go in round 1. Jeff, when I look late in round 1, I see so many teams that could benefit from a guy like Emeka Egbuka. The Baltimore Ravens, they have never shied away from drafting round 1 wide receivers, especially in the Lamar Jackson era. And while they've got Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, I think Egbuka playing primarily out of the slot could help with their run game, with his run blocking, also allowing them to move away from Mark Andrews, which we've heard that they've wanted to do. I see the Washington Commanders benefiting from adding a guy like Emeka Egbuka to kind of take over as Deebo Samuel ages out a little bit. I see the Kansas City Chiefs potentially wanting to make a move for him. I could see the Eagles potentially wanting to make a move for him. I see so many teams sitting there late in round 1 that could draft Egbuka. I don't really know what the talking point is here. I'm just saying I'd be shocked if Egbuka is still on the board when we get to day 2.
Denver Broncos.
Makes a lot of sense too.
I think when you really break it down, you look at the type of player that maybe they want within that. Obviously, I think Payton was gone when they drafted Chris Olave to New Orleans, but I know the Saints certainly love their Buckeyes. When Sean Payton was there, Michael Thomas obviously was a Buckeye. I think when you stack up what we've heard rumors that the Broncos wanted to trade up for a wide receiver. When you really look at what that wide receiver room would need, you think you've got the big play threat with Marvin Mims. Cortland Sutton, obviously very productive, but what's the long-term question there? You really need that player that can be the security blanket, the check down guy for Bo Nix, the go-to receiver in the short to intermediate areas. And Emeka Egbuka really, really lines up very well with that.
Yeah, I agree there. Now let's talk about these day 2 receivers. This is no big surprise to either of us, but some of the names that were included in this are what I want to discuss a little bit. I've said that I expect kind of a big run of receivers. Might see a handful of teams try to trade up into the back end of round 1, but very similar to last year, where we saw Ladd McConkey and Keon Coleman and Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette and Jalen Polk and all these guys just kind of clumped together at the 1-2 turn. Sounds like that we're going to see that again, a big run on receivers in day 2. And you and I have talked about this. We both expect this to happen. Day 2 is going to be flush with, this might not have the star power at the wide receiver position in this class that we've seen in other classes, but there's depth in this wide receiver class and a lot of guys that become immediate wide receiver 2s and Zs on their team. And the names that were mentioned is what I want to talk about specifically here. Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel, No big surprise there. We expected both of those Iowa State receivers to go early on day two. Jack Besh was a name that was listed in there as well. But the two names that jumped out to me, Jeff, Savion Williams and Kyle Williams, both mentioned by Peter Schrager as guys that are going to go early in day two. What do we make of that? Because I know a lot of people have been scared off by Savion Williams. He's kind of a lot of times players without a clean, pure position don't find a position whatsoever. But then we just had Matt Waldman on the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show last week. We talked about Savion Williams, and he is just enamored, saying that he's good enough to be an NFL running back, good enough to be an NFL wide receiver, and can kind of be that Swiss Army knife for an offense. And then Kyle Williams, a guy that you have liked since very early on in this draft process, originally looked at as kind of a late day three undrafted guy that could be a fun one, is now getting early day two smoke.
Kyle Williams is a dude, so
He is.
there's
Yeah.
that, and so I think that our good friend Andrew Cooper had a good tweet thread that I saw yesterday where he was talking about the differences in wide receiver, and I think that we like thinking about the fantasy football hive mind, the football fan hive mind. You see a list of wide receivers, and you see 10 different players that are all wide receivers, and this team needs a wide receiver. And so here's 10 different wide receivers. Whereas an NFL team is going to look at it and say, we need an X receiver. There's two X receivers on this list, and Jaden Higgins is going to be that guy for us. And so I think that that understanding that wide receivers like 3 or 4 different positions, depending on what offense you're talking about. And so fitting those players that fit that profile, grabbing those, we know the value of wide receivers. It's usually wide receivers don't often hit the market in their prime. And even when we did, we saw this last year, T. Higgins arguably took a below market contract to stay in Cincinnati. The Buccaneers, I mean, Chris Godwin probably took a below market contract to stay in Tampa. Those players don't shift teams so much. And I think that the narrative, the constant narrative around this class, and I don't think it's wrong, is the depth of the running back class and the lack of depth for the wide receivers. And I think two different things happened here coming out of the fantasy hive mind is we're thinking so many running backs and these wide receivers aren't all that good. Whereas NFL teams are thinking, well, this wide receiver is what we need in our offense, and there is value around that. We know if this hits, he's going to pay us forward. Meanwhile, running backs are arguably a little bit more plug and play when you get down to it in terms of being scheme specific fits. And we're fine with these other running backs. And this has been one thing that I've thought about this class for a long time is, yes, on the whole, the running backs are better than the wide receivers. That doesn't mean the wide receivers are going to get drafted behind the running backs because the way positional value works and it's just economics is resources. So if there's one guy that you think can be the X in your offense, you're going to draft him. Meanwhile, if there's 10 running backs sitting over here, you'll just let them go. They'll fall down the board and they're not going to catch that precious draft capital that we want for all of our formulas and spreadsheets. But that doesn't mean that they're worse players than what they would be ordinarily. And I think that this really just comes down to it and I did a 3-round mock draft and I did my top 100 board that should be released today. I had all 5 of these players in my top 100 board. All 5 of them were in my 3-round mock draft that was released yesterday because I leaned into that and said, there's only so many wide receivers in this draft that teams are going to want to invest in. They're not going to be throwing the darts on day 3 like they normally do. They're going to grab these guys in round 2 and 3 because it's key roles within their offensive scheme.
Yeah, completely agree there. And I always kind of look at it that way, just the positional value, the way that the NFL looks at these positions. I kind of look at a round 3 running back is pretty similar in value to a round 2 wide receiver. And then you look at the depth of this running back class, it could cause these guys who should be, late round 2 or early round 3 receivers might get pushed all the way out to round 4 or 5 now because of the depth of the class. Nobody wants to be the one that starts the run. They want to be the guys catching the guys at the end of that run. So Jeff, I don't know about you. I can't wait for the draft to get here. I'm so sick of prognosticating about the draft and guessing about what's going to happen. I just need to know, where are these guys going? How do we fit them in on the depth chart? It cannot come soon enough. We're not going to be doing any live streams on this channel, the YouTube Dynasty channel, but Thursday night, you can head over to the Audible channel. I should know that off the top of my head. I think it's youtube.com/footballguystv. I don't know. You can find it here. It's one of our similar channels that you can find on the YouTube page. We're going to be doing Thursday night. Sigmund Bloom and Matt Waldman are going to be hosting a live stream event. Jeff, you're going to be on that. I'll be on that. Alfredo Brown's going to be on that. And then Friday night for day 2, Jeff Bell, myself, Alfredo Brown, Mike Kashuba. We're going to be doing a long, I think it's going to be like 3.5, 4 hours. We're going to be streaming during all of day 2. We're going to have a nonstop rotation of guests coming in. Matt Waldman, Bob Harris, Hutchison Brown. We're going to highlight about 20 different staffers we have on Football Guys for that. It's going to be just a fun little watch party. We'll be watching the draft, reacting to the picks as they come in. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can see those as they come up. Jeff and I are only doing one episode this week. It would be kind of silly to do a Thursday afternoon episode like we normally do with how quickly things are changing. But next week, we're going to be back. We're going to be looking at the results of the draft. We're going to be looking at winners, losers, veterans that are changing in value, rookies that we expect to smash because of their landing spots. Really fun part of the season coming up. So be sure to subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. Want to thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you Thursday and Friday for our live streams, and we'll be back next week with our normally scheduled episodes of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.